Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel update. As we continue to deliberate the various developments here in Israel and throughout the region, it is always important to highlight that 154 days ago, the Islamist terror groups from the Hamas-plagued Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping some 246 individuals, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 134 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. Let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Mr. Oren, give us a broader understanding on the latest developments, and if you may also, particularly chief focus on the Gaza Strip initially.
So this is, of course, the start of the 6th month of the war in Gaza, and the Israeli Defense Forces saw action over the last 24 hours on all three active fronts: airstrikes in Lebanon, in return for rockets and missiles being launched at Israel, at the Israeli Galilee district, north of the northern part of Israel, in Judea and Samaria, an operation by the IDF Duvdevan unit, which is an undercover elite battalion, and Yamam, the special police unit. And in Gaza, again, more battles in the various neighborhoods of Khan Yunis, but also in some areas, refugee camps and other towns and neighborhoods somewhat north of there in the central district of Gaza. Not yet any action in Rafah. This, of course, awaits coordination between the Israeli government and the US administration. Now, two important events took place in Washington last night, both of them on Capitol Hill. General Eric Michael Kurilla, the commanding general of CENTCOM, the Central Command, came to the Armed Services Committee in the Senate with the annual posture statement regarding this region. And President Biden, of course, had his State of the Union speech. And while General Kurilla's statement did not get a lot of coverage due to the State of the Union event, which of course overshadowed it, he had several very interesting observations. The gist of it is that contrary to a year ago, when he had the 2023 posture statement, the region is now on the verge of flaring up because of Iranian mischief. And while Iran did not plan the October 7th attack and was not party to it specifically, it had a lot of involvement in equipping and sponsoring Hamas, as well as its other proxies, and is exploiting the situation. General Kurilla warned that the Central Command area of operations should still be considered the most important one, not only because he is in charge of it, of course, but because a lot of mischief would come out of it. So it bears reading his statement or watching the video. He was pestered mostly by questions regarding the Houthis and what the US forces are doing against the Iranian vessels, giving targeting information to the Houthis. And if this targeting information can be used to kill Americans, be they on US Navy ships or merchant marines, why doesn't the administration do anything about it? And of course, the general said that it's a policy question. It is not for him to answer. As for President Biden, the main news had to do with the emergency pier, which he promised would be coming to Gaza soon, or to the sea across from Gaza soon, the shore. And more about that later. But that would mean that President Biden would expect a ceasefire, because otherwise U.S. forces, even without coming ashore, could come under fire. The Hamas can have anti-tank missiles shot at the pier or the logistics vessel. And as we are talking right now, news comes in about a bombing and a terror attack in which 2 Israelis were wounded in Samaria. So never a dull moment.
Indeed. Well, 3 points. The first one about Iran not planning the Gaza onslaught on October 7th. Of course, it's not proven. We do not necessarily know whether or not this was a probe of the Iranians to try and test the waters before a wider scale conflagration, or what it actually entailed. Nevertheless, considering the heavy investments that the Iranians have made in the Islamist Hamas and its closest ally in the Gaza Strip, namely Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is an Iranian proxy, and the various activities and the modus operandi that was executed, very similar to the preparations of the Iranian proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon, indicates that there was heavy Iranian involvement, and whether or not they were the ones that triggered the event remains to be researched. And of course, the intelligence community will have to come up with some subsequent lessons learned and some information to try and provide a broader picture. With regard to the State of the Union, we will speak about General Kurilla's testimony later, but I'd like to ask particularly our American guest, moving to Washington for that, where we're joined by retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, formerly the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. It's good to see you, General. What do you make up from the State of the Union, particularly on the suggestion by President Joe Biden on his intention to establish a pier, viability of such an endeavor, all the while pledging that there won't be any boots on the ground? I'm a little confused.
Yeah, as we were talking about before the show started, to me, this seems to be the classic, we must be seen to be doing something. It will be quite difficult to put a pier in without American boots touching the ground. The way the president has talked about this, he says this will be done in concert with partner nations. So perhaps that's the method by which there is a separation of 10 feet between wet boots of Americans and dry boots of the partner nations that are doing the final preparation for the bridge, the pier. It is very, very hard to see how you can put in a pier of that magnitude and not have American troops being part of that who are trained for it. It's a specialized piece of equipment. But let's wait and see. And then the other thing we talked about, of course, is the security of that pier, not only as it's being constructed, but after it's in place and American ships are pulling up to that pier and dropping off supplies. So I think it's a good soundbite that was given last night. The soundbite that has been put in the press that we are doing something about the situation in Gaza by putting in this pier. But I think it's going to have a tough confrontation with reality when those pier struts are being put in.
Naturally, there are some also additional constraints related to this from a judicial perspective, from other perspectives for that matter. We heard, or specifically, former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo spoke at the Hudson Institute about the fact that the Secretary of State will have to sign some waivers in order to make such a reality come forth. Nevertheless, when we're looking at the European Union, particularly Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, she traveled to Cyprus, where she already announced that what we're expected to see today, they intend to already start with a certain pilot of sorts. And then by Saturday or Sunday, they already expect to be delivering aid through some maritime corridor. Is that viable? I don't really seem to understand the logistics behind all of this and the various concerns that we're speaking about. Mr. Owen?
Well, a couple of years ago, as part of another in a series of transformation plans and budgetary cuts or realignments in the U.S. Navy, the two logistics ships, which were in service and had a good life still remaining in them, were decommissioned and put in reserves. They are called, I believe, Montfort City and John Glenn, commemorating the Marine Corps pilot and astronaut. And in order to recommission them and revive them and get them from the United States to Gaza will take so much time, several weeks, and then get the vessels to the pier and all of that. That means that for the time being, there will probably be an imposed ceasefire imposed by Biden on Israel in order to let Americans, be they American servicemen or contractors or whoever, working there, because otherwise it could end in a tragedy and disaster. And the sad part is that the onus is going to be on Israel to take care of their safety and security. So the fact that Biden is now in charge of aid to the civilian population in Gaza puts quite some limits on the operational maneuvers of the Israeli Defense Forces.
Making things increasingly difficult, of course, but nonetheless, I'd like to revert to you, General Kimmett. What needs to be done at a time when we're seeing that the Biden administration is seemingly ratcheting up its pressure on Israel to try and resolve something, to gain a certain win in the success, at least from President Biden, his perspective, at a time when Israel is still fighting against a terrorist organization designated as such by the United States that has committed a massacre on October 7th, killing 1,200 individuals, including many foreign nationals, 33 Americans, not to forget, has kidnapped 246 individuals, of them 12 Americans. Some of them, more than half, are still in Hamas captivity. And it seems like the focus is on how to treat the population rather than how to get those Americans out at all cost.
Well, that's somewhat of a rhetorical question, but the single answer to all of this is Michigan. It simply comes down to the one word, Michigan, which is a swing state in the American electoral process for presidential election. They had the recent Super Tuesday primary in America. 100,000 Palestinians, Arabs of descent inside of Michigan voted no candidate where they traditionally would have voted for Biden. There's a great fear on the part of President Biden that he's losing a vital community that's significant in one of the swing states. If it wasn't politics, if it wasn't a state led for the most part by the left wing of the Democratic Party, to which in many ways Joe Biden is beholden to, I think that President Biden or any president would be four square behind Israel, recognizing the facts on the ground. There wouldn't be as many protests. There wouldn't be as much support coming out of the White House. So I think you've got to understand that as one looks at the situation, realistically, it's as you describe. But when you put the sunglasses on of politics, you see the situation in a completely different way than you would if you took those sunglasses off.
May I make a comment here?
Before you do,
Jonathan?
I'll interject and make my own comment. It makes me think about an absurd scenario in which a certain president would blame bad inflation on an invasion that just occurred when the preceding months obviously deteriorated quite rapidly. Go ahead, Mr. Owen.
A couple of points. One is that the Michiganders of Dearborn and the other vicinities have a faulty memory, or at least fresh memories suppress older ones. Because a few years ago, when then President Trump had a travel ban on people from Muslim countries, they came out against him. But now, of course, they forgot about it, and now they think that the Palestinian cause, as they simplistically see it, by Hamas, championed by Hamas, makes them, of course, attack the Democratic Party and President Biden, and let the chips fall where they may. But it's interesting to see how recent events cloud less recent ones. Now, the other point is that some extreme right-wing Israeli politicians, such as Bezalel Smotrich, always come out with plans to relocate Palestinians, to encourage them. They say, no, we are not going to force anyone, but let's give them incentives to leave Gaza and the West Bank, let them go somewhere else. So if they go somewhere else, and that somewhere else is the United States, they have political power to act against Israel. So it's not such a clever ploy anyway.
Well, they shouldn't go to the United States, nor should they go to Europe. They should go to other Islamic countries if that were the option. And with regard to the travel ban, I'm sorry, but if you have 100,000 people supporting Hamas, it just reinforces the decision on merits rather than just political reasons. But that's for another discussion. I'd like to move to another theater, and that is Lebanon. The United States continues to work tirelessly via its envoy, Amos Hochstein, regarding efforts to try and de-escalate the situation there. It doesn't seem to bear fruit at this moment in time. What can you tell us about that, General Kimmett?
Well, I think you've described it quite well. There's not a lot to report simply because he's not making a lot of progress there. At this point, Lebanon doesn't seem to have a lot of incentive in order to make any significant changes. In many ways, the view from here is that Hassan Nasrallah has been the only reasonable actor in this entire conflict. So let's not do anything to tickle the bear. So I think Amos is being entangled a little bit to the point where he is able to be the envoy, but not so much that he's going to pressure Hezbollah so significantly as if in order to make a major breakthrough.
Everybody is concerned.
You are concerned about Hezbollah entering this fight. And America doesn't want to be seen as complicit if they were to enter the fight because of too hard of a push from Hochstein or from the American administration.
Rational actor in what sense, though?
Rational actor in that he can push on Lebanon, he can push on Hezbollah, but not to the point where unintentionally it is used as a pretext by Hezbollah to say, well, let's just go ahead and start this war since it's coming anyways, both from the Israelis and from the push from the Americans. So let's just bring them into the conflict, or let's just get ourselves involved in the conflict. But we'll see. Amos is a very, very very, very effective envoy. He's pulled some rabbits out of the hat over the years. And so let's see if he can accomplish something.
He's definitely a shrewd diplomat for that matter. But Mr. Oren, I'd like to hear from an Israeli perspective, since we still deal with 61,000 Israelis who were displaced by the government into other locations of Israel. At the same time, we have over 40,000 Israeli residents beyond the 5-kilometer perimeter that was established as a buffer zone, who also left their homes for security reasons on their own accord. Thankfully, that occurred because already a number of residential buildings were struck during this course of time that may have had residents that would have not been ordered to move elsewhere hurt in such a situation. And therefore, how does the Israeli government deal with such a precarious situation?
So, realistically speaking, this entire school year, 2023-24, has been wasted. The school year is going to end in 3 months' time, in late June. Whoever left home and managed to enroll in another school, in another town, is not going to move back before the end of the year, the academic year. So apparently, all eyes are on early July in order for the summer recess to be used for moving back. Now, obviously, the Israeli government is committed to returning the residents and to rehabilitating the communities which were heavily damaged. Some houses are uninhabitable now. And when you look at the negotiations, be they the Hochstein-led negotiations or in whatever channel, there are always three options, just like in any military contingencies, which General Kimmett can better describe than me. You have the best case scenario, you have the worst case scenario, and you have the middle one. And in this case, the best case would be, of course, total ceasefire, withdrawal of the Hezbollah Radwan force, total peace and quiet, and everybody goes home. Also in South Lebanon, there are also many Lebanese who left their homes. This is probably not going to happen anytime soon. You have the worst case scenario, which is war, including ground movements. This is quite a possibility, a distinct possibility. And you have the medium option of containment, gradual return to the status quo, and at least in the eyes of observers, some acquiescence with tension which will accompany the situation until the first violation of either an agreement or some unilateral decision by Hezbollah to withdraw. And apparently this is where the efforts are concentrating right now, to contain rather than escalate, and to get the parties to agree to some modus vivendi.
With utilizing those words in Latin, one just can also trace back to ancient Latin wisdoms by the Romans. Don't delay war when you have the upper hand, which Israel currently has. Nevertheless, it is constrained. So there are some issues with that. I don't think that the medium option is the best option, not for the residents of northern Israel at least, who do not see a return to their houses unless they feel secure and knowing that Hezbollah is just across the border, irrespective of any arrangements that are not implemented by force. It's going to become a very tardy reality. But I'd like to ask you, General Kimmett, we don't have very much time left. Nonetheless, I do want to focus on a couple of statements made by General Michael Kurilla, commander of CENTCOM. He highlighted initially that the Houthis are not deterred, nor is Iran when it comes to the Houthis. Iran is not deterred when it comes to Hamas, Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and Hezbollah in Lebanon particularly, they seem to be deterred, which he highlighted is temporary when it comes to the attacks emanating from Hashd-e-Shaabi and its affiliated proxies also in the Fatimiyun brigades and so on in Syria and in Iraq. To what degree do you see all of this persist, considering the fact that he also stated that Iran is not being held accountable? It's not paying the cost and feels quite comfortable with the current reality.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. There is some belief that since we can't find not only the proverbial, but the actual smoking gun with the Iranians, that somehow they are not involved. Look, if an adult gives his son a weapon and propagandizes his son to believe in the person next door is evil and terrible, and the son then just goes out and shoots the next door neighbor, the father is held complicit here in the United States. And somehow that's the same scenario with Iran. They're arming, training, equipping, ideologizing, if that's a correct word, all the organizations that start with H in the region, Hezbollah, Houthis, Hashd. But somehow when they then act and then they do carry out these types of actions, to include the October 7th, that somehow Iran can say, well, we didn't tell them to do that. In any court of law, Iran would be found complicit and an accessory to the crime. And I think that's what Kurilla is saying. And in fact, Kurilla was smart enough to take Thomas Friedman on his latest trip around the region. Friedman wrote a very good article in the New York Times on the 5th of March saying America's shadow war with Iran. I would commend your readers, your viewers, to read it, because I think in a very short essay, it sort of sums up Kurilla's views, certainly Thomas Friedman's views, and I think anybody who watches this area would agree with that essay in terms of what Iranian complicity is and what their end game is.
Indeed. Well, absolutely, it was a very good piece, and naturally, one of the things that I think that should be highlighted, which Thomas Friedman did highlight, is that in contrast to the war between Russia and Ukraine, when we're talking about the Middle East, a proxy war, the Iranians are holding back and are letting their tentacles move around and roam around and perpetrate their own strategic interests, all the while Israel, which he highlighted, and the moderate Arab states or pragmatic Arab states in the region do not know how to respond or are unwilling, as he mentioned it, which raises the question about the stakes in such a war, the concerns, but also the will to engage at this stage. And much of that has to do with the confidence of regional actors right now in the United States under the current administration, which seems to be a little weak, unfortunately, at least perceived as such. And that is, of course, impacting much of the decision-making currently taking place throughout this region. Mr. Oren, closing sentence?
I can join your sentiment regarding General Kurilla's ideas, and the missing piece in the administration's policy, as they see it, is integrating Israel into the broader Middle East by creating a Palestinian state, a militarized, a minus or whatever you want to call it. But this apparently is going to be debated for a long time, and we won't solve it right now on this show.
Well, I'm highly skeptical of this realizing itself in the near future or long future, unless trust is built and a new reality can be created in one way or another. Again, very doubtful, but nonetheless, I'd like to thank General Kimmett and Mr. Oren for your time. I'd like to thank also all of you at home. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense. during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.